I'm Oren Michels. I'm CEO of Mashery. We are largely, sponsoring the conference, so I get to say hi first. Thank you all for coming. We're here to talk today about the business of APIs so that we can then have some context for what the business of them is. API stands for Application Programming Interface, which means very little to most people. What is an API? Katerina Fake says an API is BizDev 2.0. And so that's good, but that doesn't really tell us anything anyway either. So I thought I'd give you a couple of examples for some context before we jump into Tom Howe's first presentation. The first mashup, the first time that someone thought, I'm going to mix together some APIs, was a site called housingmaps.com. A guy named Paul Rademacher took a look at Craigslist, and he saw a bunch of apartment listings. And he took a look at Google Maps, and he thought, wouldn't it be cool if the Craigslist apartment listings showed up on the Google map? And turned out that Craigslist puts out an RSS feed, which is basically an API, and Google had just announced an API for their maps. So he mixed the two together and created a new application, pulling data in one case and processing power from another case to create a new application. And thus was born the concept of the API and the mashup. From a consumer standpoint, these APIs are essentially building blocks. They're web building blocks for new applications. They're things you can make use of and therefore not have to build yourself and create applications around. So if you look at a bunch of APIs that might be out there, you can take data from an API and create a widget, which is another, well, that's actually another conference that's going on down the road. But a widget is essentially consumes data or processing power from an API. This is a Trulia widget that shows you a median housing price, but could be just about anything. Or you can mix different APIs together like was done with the Google Maps. This is also using Trulia. It's Neighboroo, which is a site that makes use of data from a couple different places. And then another way you can use APIs actually is to create Facebook applications. And we'll talk a little about Facebook later, but Facebook is the hot topic of the day. And of course, that was last week's conference. But the concept of opening up an API, of creating this means of a building block and distribution for all these different things is sort of the business of that is what we're here to talk about today. So what is an API? Well, it is a distribution alternative. The commenter on Fred Wilson's blog said that a smart BD guy simply works more with his in-house API guru and less with his Rolodex. What he's trying to get to is that if you if you open the right part of your infrastructure to the outside world, people will come and build things on it, and they'll actually help distribute your services for you. And I'd like to just give a little bit of a block diagram of how that works, and then we'll be on our way. So we'll start by how a web application is built, because most of you have some sort of a web application in your world. Web application starts with the data layer. There's some repository of data. It could be your data, it could be someone else's data, it could be data you create, it could be data your users create, but somewhere there's a big chunk of data, and it talks to a logic layer. Something is done with that data. So you have data, something is done with it, and then there's a distribution layer, and that distribution layer renders it into something useful called a web page. All of that is controlled by a bunch of control panels and other sorts of things where someone back in your office decides how all these things are going to work together and gets to manipulate them. And the end result of this is a web page. So that's sort of the front door version of how people distribute their own stuff. The API is the side door version. So what happens with the API is you have access, generally not to the presentation layer, because the whole point is you're presenting it in a different way, but you'll get access to the data, or you'll get access to the processing capabilities, or you'll be able to manipulate the control area in such a way as to be able to build new applications on top of it. This infrastructure, what you sort of need to have an API, basically is security. If you're opening up your side door, you want to know who's coming in and what they're doing and how much they're taking. You need to have reporting so you can actually see what's going on. And you need to have distribution. If you're going to have a lot of people suddenly accessing your infrastructure, you need to make sure that it's scalable and it's able to handle what they need to do. So this all is the API infrastructure, and it is able to then feed new web applications. It's able to feed widgets. It's able to feed Facebook apps. And even sometimes people use it to feed desktop applications. Twitter actually powers a bunch of different desktop applications. I know Dave from Jambase is here, and they've got some people using their API in the iTunes software itself. So you can actually have, it's not just for web applications, it can be really for any kind of application. So looking at this, what essentially the metaphor that we'll probably come back to a few times today is that the web page is the front door. That's where people come and go, and they see it's your building, they see it's your world, and they're consuming directly from you. The API is the distribution channel. This is the loading dock. This is where you can move large quantities and large amount of your services out if you build it and structure it right. That's what we're here to talk about today. In closing, we mentioned Twitter. BizStone, in a recent interview, said that they have 10 times as much traffic coming through their API as coming out the front door on Twitter. And that's because people have built all kinds of applications around it. So it's that kind of opportunity that we're here to talk about today. And we'll start with Tom Howe. Thank you.